based on that, yesterday actually, there were high school students attending the session, and today we have also attendants from high schools. Therefore, at the very beginning of the roundtable session for today, I'd like to invite you to listen to the voices from the high school students from Fukushima Prefecture. There are many evacuees living in different places within the Fukushima Prefecture, and there are people living within the Fukushima Prefecture just like high school students, and each person has each difficulty, and everyone has to make an effort to overcome those difficulties. And they say that they are here to study more about what happens after 3/11. Now, on behalf of all high school students coming here, I'd like to ask Mr. Suguru Yokota to make their first message to all of us. Mr. Yokota, please. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I must have fully enjoyed my life as a high school junior at the high school somewhere in Kolyama-suri and Fukushima Prefecture. However, actually right now I live in the city of Sapporo in Hokkaido, and I'm not a high school junior, rather I'm a high school freshman. Because of 3/11 happened at the Fukushima NPP, and this accident has changed my life 180 degrees, and this is a really inevitable fact because I have to leave everything, close friends, my families, and all of them, and of course there are quite a dilemma to make a decision for that. However, because of my two experiences, I can make a decision. First of all, the employment for the first time, and the first experience is this participation to the recreation program for the first time in the summer 2011. I participated in the recreational program held in Hokkaido. In addition to that, in the following year of 2012, I have taken part in Tsubasa, the recreational program with learning support. Especially in the summer of 2011, I now realize that how surreal or unrealistic that I have to avoid from the exposure, and I have to fight against the radiation, and then I have a really strong craving for the ordinary as a matter of course living. In addition to that, just before 3/11, when I was junior high school freshman, I happened to study the nuclear power generation, and this has caused the main cause for me to relocate to take a refuge in Hokkaido. And then 3 years have passed after making the fresh start in my life, and now 1 year and a half when I started a new life in Hokkaido. And I believe you look at the situation of Fukushima really unhumane, and even after 3 years, the stronger, the longer the time has passed, the stronger I feel that our life is really unhumane. But if you're concerned about the radiation and its threat, you cannot keep psychologically and physically a healthy state. And this is not limited to Fukushima. This issue should be at the global, should be regarded as the global issue, because this issue has never been stopped at the present progressive form. What to do with the situation and what we have to do to prevent a similar situation from happening again in the future. And that's what we have to do, because this is a huge responsibility and the obligation imposed on us, because we have experienced a Fukushima situation with our own eyes and ears. I have made a choice of evacuating and relocate to the different places than Fukushima. However, there are many people, including family members and friends, remaining in Fukushima while fighting against radiation. Hokkaido and Fukushima, each one of us has made a different options or selections. However, in order to bring the ordinary life back to the future generation while preventing the similar situation from happening in the future, we have to be that important cog for the future will and we have to think about what we can do. Though it may be small, still we have to think about what we can do. The one step for that is that many people have to get an accurate and correct information on the radiation, especially the health effect by the low dose exposure. In that sense, I really appreciate to have this opportunity, and I'd like to thank CSRP to give us this opportunity to share our experiences and thoughts as Tsubasa member. Thank you very much. Do you have a comment?
Ich danke dir sehr für deine Rede und finde, das ist genau der richtige Platz, dass du die heutige Diskussion eröffnest.
Suguru, thank you very much for your comment. And the fact that you are here and what you said is really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Viele von uns sind deutlich älter als wir.
So far, in the past 2 days, we have talked about the very details. However, most of the members are older than you. So the younger generations really struggle with Fukushima should not be fully understood because we are too old. Still, what we are working very hard by discussing many details is because for your generation. So please understand what we are doing as for your generation, young people. Sometimes when we have this kind of discussion, we are exhausted to do it more. However, we are very happy to have you.
Situation, wo man denkt, dass man kaum etwas verändern kann, weil die Situation so schwierig ist. 君たちにもこんな状況はどうしようもない。もう
You may feel that you cannot do anything and you may want to be resigned and accept the situation.
Das zu tun, was man für richtig hält.
However, it's very important for you to stick to what you believe right. Even if the chance of success is very small, still it's very important for you to hold your cause. There are something we cannot achieve, and I believe your generation can realize our dreams and hopes in the future. Mr. Yokota and your friends, we really appreciate your attendance today. So you will be here by around 2:30 today. Thank you very much. Mr. Yokota, thank you very much again. And please give the warm round of applause to them and to yourself. I would like to invite you to cover today's program one by one. First, the discussion will see the emergency response measures and the radiation protection. Mr. Oishi, overview, and Mr. Kawakami, these two people will discuss under this topic. First of all, Dr. Kawakami, please. By the way, Tohoku Help is headquartered in Sendai, and this is a Christian organization to provide support for the survival. We are going beyond the boundary of the Christianity. Mr. Kawakami has provided support, and he has been very active in the support. And he has been heavily involved in the voices to negate the nuclear power generation. Mr. Kawakami, please.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Naoya Kawakami, and I am a priest with the Japan Priest Association. I would like to apologize. First, I actually need to go to Yamagata on the 11:30 train. So I'm sorry that I will need to speak and then leave. I am a specialist in theology, and there's just one thing that has been proven in the field of theology according to Chesterton, and that is the concept of what presently exists. There used to be three concepts: thought, belief, and action. And then after the war, a missio, which is a mission or neglect, is another concept that was introduced. Since taking part in this conference from Saturday, I see that this has become a reality because it's painful, it's sad, and it's terrible. But I believe that this also has been proven. And with that in mind, I would like to share with you my presentation. I would like to talk about the radiation disaster reduction efforts that we have been doing in the field contaminated by artificial radionuclides. I didn't want my speech to be too long, so I have a script that I have prepared for today, and I will be following my script. I hope that you all have the script with you. Here's the handout, so you can take a look at it and open it. I also have another handout for you today. Thanks to the Secretariat, I think that this has also been provided, so please take a look later on if you can. So I would like to go to page 2 of my script. I would like to first introduce myself. Tohoku Help is working mostly in Tohoku, and we have been providing assistance for the earthquake victims. Today we would like to talk mostly about our disaster risk reduction efforts for radiation. There's also a video that introduces our efforts. This was produced in February of 2013. This was aired in South Korea. We have an English and Japanese version.
Minasan, こんにちは。私は牧師の川上です。ここは東日本の中心地、仙台市にありますキリスト教の支援施設、東北ヘルプです。2011年3月11日、14時46分、太平洋沖地震とそれに伴い発生した津波によって私たちの生活は一変しました。高さ最大21メートルの津波が南北500キロの海岸線に襲いかかり、多くの人々の財産を瓦礫に変え、その水と瓦礫は秒速8メートルものスピードで町に襲いかかりました。その後、水と瓦礫に襲われた建物からは炎が吹き上がり、北の被災地には厳しい雪が降り注ぎました。翌日、原子力発電所が爆発事故を起こします。誰も経験したことのない恐ろしい事故でした。道は封鎖され、事故現場付近に住んでいた人々は強制的に立ち退かされました。この震災で電気、ガス、水道などのライフラインが止まり、食料の調達もままならなくなりました。多くの人々が明日への希望を探している中、東北のクリスチャンは結束しました。震災から1週間後、 仙台中の協会の責任者と世界中からさまざまな支援団体が一堂に集まり、小型ガソリン発電機での薄暗い明かりの中、会議を行い、支援事務局を立ち上げます。事務局の名前は東北ヘルツと名付けられました。仙台で東北ヘルプが立ち上がったようで、青森では 3.11 青森協会ネットワーク、岩手では 3.11 岩手協会ネットワーク、三重県でも南三陸を支える九州は福島県キリスト教連絡会など多くの団体が立ち上がったのです。学校の体育館などに
Academics look for truth. They welcome opposite views and look for theoretical coherence. Policy is about finding justice and about making things black and white to come to a conclusion. Business is about Business is about the pursuit of profit, and this is about looking at profit and loss and surviving competition. Media is about exposing belief. So this is to not be in fear of confusion and removing the secrecy veil. What do we do as faith-based people? I think we are those who try to make harmony with the blessing based on faith. So, as a faith-based practitioner, I would like to share our activities in the radiation disaster reduction in the field affected by radiation. As a Christian, we would like to provide assistance as Christians. We believe that there is a special force because we have closeness and we have connections. In Japan have the trust from local communities. So the Christians have a good connection with the local communities. Christians also have a connection with the world. As a member of the WCC, which is the World Council of Churches, so as a representative of and he worked to win compensation from the United States for these people. He worked directly with the United Nations and was able to increase the compensation damages paid by about 2 orders of magnitude. There are 3 different types of academics. The first is the expert. They are often ridiculed and criticized as the nuclear power village. Many of them work with the IAEA or as a part of the industry that is colluding with the nuclear military. I believe that that integration has become more noticeable since the nuclear power plant accident. The second type of academic but is a layman in that field. And they have tried to learn sincerely about this after 3.5 years. They have tried to sort out what they have been able to find out, and they are trying to make decisions so that they can live safely. One issue is that they are likely to ignore what they were not able to understand before. And I need to be careful in this area as well, but I believe that we are now becoming closer and closer to the first type of academic. I'm sorry, since I'm reading from the script, I'm speaking very fast, so I'd like to slow down a little bit. So now moving on to page 4, the third type of academic, they are the anti-nuclear types. These are citizen-based scientists. We have some here today. And I believe that they have endured persecution for a long time. After the nuclear power plant accident, many citizens increased their respect for these academics. However, now they are faced with a different danger. And that danger is the risk of division, because society will not change immediately. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but these scientists and academics have become more aggressive, and to the layman's perspective, it looks as if there's increased risk of internal division. As a theologist and as a layman, I am a supporter. I would like to stay true to my position in the second category, and I don't want to easily talk about safety. I want to learn from the critiques of the academics in the third category, but also do not want to ignore what I do not understand. I don't want to provoke anxiety unnecessarily and want to provide support in a sure and steady way. So I would like to learn from the successes of the academics in the first category. So in reviewing the current status, in looking back on the 3 years of assistance that we have provided, I believe that the problem has become crystallized as a layman's perspective. This may be wrong because I'm a layman, but because I have this opportunity, I'd like to talk to you about these focal points. So in looking at man-made nuclear substances, radioactive substances, I believe that the biggest issue from the nuclear power plant accident is the man-made radioactive substances. It's only been 72 years since the Manhattan Project. Yet, when it comes to the effects to the human health of these man-made radioactive substances, we don't really know anything. And by the way, theology has been around for 2,000 years. In August, NHK conducted a survey in an area 172 kilometers away from the accident site. There was uranium in the form of glass that was discovered. And this was the size of PM 2.5, and it was emitting alpha rays and beta rays and was not soluble in water. It was 172 kilometers from the site, so if it was dispersed evenly, and of course this probably doesn't happen, but in the worst case scenario, per 1 square centimeter, there would have been a maximum of 76 pieces of this man-made radioactive substance on the ground. And I asked a mathematician to help me with this calculation. So what happens if somebody inhales this? Or what happens to the virus and the bacteria inside of this type of soil, which is filled of radiation? We did some more research, and we have disclosed, or we will be sharing this information on our website soon. This is a piece of information that was already disclosed. I'm a layman, but I've done my best to study up on this. And another well-known topic is pediatric thyroid cancer. There have been an abnormal number of cases of pediatric thyroid cancer. So in Aizu Wakamatsu, which is the same distance away from Sendai, in Aizu Wakamatsu, 100 kilometers away, there were 5 cases of thyroid cancer among 15,000 people. So if this is caused by the nuclear power plant accident, then there will be many diseases discovered across multiple organs. This is what Chernobyl has taught us. Another lesson from Chernobyl is the probability of the country or state collapsing. In 1986, the accident in Chernobyl occurred. In the international conference in 1990, the catastrophe was made known, and the 3 Baltic countries won independence in 1991. After that, the Soviet Union collapsed. In 2006, the former leader, Gorbachev, said that the Chernobyl accident was a cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm going to page 5. Here in Japan, I feel the same thing happening. The governor of Okinawa won the election after calling for Okinawa nationalism. I feel that the country is increasing its control. The problem surrounding Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is a social issue that may direct whether this country will survive or not. And looking at the 4th issue, or perhaps, excuse me, I may have misnumbered this. This is our 3rd issue to look at. There are 3 contradictions that we face here. Based on the above, the residents of the affected areas are struggling with 3 contradictions. One is conflict versus collaboration. Conflict is creating collaboration, and then in order to maintain the collaboration, the conflict is being retained. And this will lead to internal division. For example, regular citizens are comparing their area versus all other areas, and this is actually Miyagi, but there is discrimination here because people outside of Fukushima believe that any area outside of Fukushima is safe. As a resident of Miyagi, I always feel apologetic towards the people of Fukushima. And then secondly, independence versus isolation. People who have power are able to gain independence. People who are not are left behind. The 3rd contradiction is health versus daily living. People want to protect their lives from radiation, but if you try to completely protect yourself and your health, then that will not allow you to maintain your living. But if you try to maintain your quality of life, then that will engender anxieties about your health. The people that I am supporting, they want to flee, but they are not able to, so therefore they try to settle for something else. Page 6. I have 5 more minutes, so I will try to slow down a little bit. There's a video that captures this well called Fukushima Happy. This is on YouTube and on the internet, so please look at it. Fukushima mayor and the Fukushima station master, children and elderly people are being depicted as living a fun, happy-filled life. It's a very pop and stylish video, and it makes me very scared because many mothers in Fukushima, they say that if they talk about their children, if they say that they're worried about their children, then they are recommended by others to be checked up at the hospital because they may be suffering from mental distress. And some mothers have actually become truly sick because they have been given sleeping pills or they have lost sleep over their condition. And support, we believe that our support should be more about preventing regret and rather communicating, not just conveyance of information. I believe that conveying information is fine, but if you receive information that you feel as if you need to follow that, or you ignore that. So whoever is providing the information has the power, and they must not disregard that point. However, if you are providing support, then you need to remain close to the people you are supporting.
And that is why we need to understand what they need. So communication really is the key. The objective that we have is so that the people will not regret. What we are doing is to protect the health of the people who cannot flee, and secondly, to create the network of the measurement centers, and thirdly, to undertake advocacy of the hibakusha around the world. And in Sendai, Koriyama, and Iwaki, we are active. And also within our diocese, we are in Aizu and Haramachi, we are active. So these are the offices where we work from, and we create a solidarity network. We started the beta ray measurement as well, and I have a high hope for this. And also, the short-term recuperation, this is what it's about. We provide recuperation support. Please look at these details later on. And also, international solidarity is what we are undertaking. This is in Tahiti. We have brought a stone from Fukushima, from Minamisoma. We have created a glass made out of the sands from Minamisoma and other afflicted areas. We brought it to Tahiti, along with a letter from the Nagasaki mayor. These are stones from Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and brought it to Algeria. There are other stones from other parts like Fiji, and we placed our stones together. Going to the page 7, I have 2 more minutes. How do we face with nuclear arsenal going forward? So complex organizations of military and industry use of the nuclear power. That's what we are talking about. That WCRP has had its assembly on the 2014 in the summer, and at that time we had shared a booth together with other nations to undertake this advocacy forum. And as a result of this event, we have realized in creating this declaration document to create a nuclear-free world 6 months later. So it was very hard to bring this to realization. In order to create a nuclear-free world, we need to actually listen to the voices of hibakusha around the world. This is not about no nukes, but it's rather nuclear-free. And the key word really is a nuclear-free, freedom from nuclear power. And we actually had quoted from the Bible as well. So what does it mean to be free from nuclear? Well, this actually has the background in the Exodus, where the slaves were freed. Just like the slaves were freed, we need to be free from nuclear. There were threats that tell us that it's thanks to the nuclear power that we have electricity. But unless we can be free from that threat, we will not be able to be successful in whatever we do. Since 19th century, we have seen the liberation of the Black people, the African American people, and this is also the reflection of the history of the Christianity as well, with the emergence of Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. And in a way, now we are seeing same kind of leaders who are trying to help the people who are faced with the threat of nuclear irradiation. In September in Kyoto, we have met someone who has fled from Fukushima, and that person was in Watari area, which was most irradiated. That person created the coalition of mothers, created the contamination map. The government didn't do anything, and slowly a lot of people, gradually the members of this coalition left and evacuated. Eventually, that person also evacuated to Kyoto. The lady said that in 2 or 3 years, when the kid is a bit older, they'd like to go back to Fukushima to help people who are suffering in place. At the end of the 19th century, Harriet Tubman grew up as a slave in the southern part of U.S. And succeeded in fleeing in the northern part. But after his successful liberation, he went back to the south to help other people, other slaves flee. And I think, in a way, these are the same kind of leaders. Since the time is up, I'd like to conclude my speech here. Mr. Kawakami, thank you very much for your presentation. In terms of the religious people and the faith-based organization undertaking support activities for the disaster-afflicted people, I am also involved as well. And I also studied about theology and Christianity in Jochi Sophia University. And there are other religions like Buddhists, Hinduists, and Muslims, and the other religious people who are participating in these support activities as well. But what the characteristic here is that there is a coalition that goes beyond the wars of different religions, and you gave us an example of what you are doing in order to help with for the people on site. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Mitsunobu Oishi for his presentation, please.
There are many damages happening in Fukushima Prefecture, as you know. However, as the radioactive substances go beyond the Fukushima Prefecture as a fallout, for example, Ibaraki, Chiba, Tochigi, Gunma prefectures are just one of the areas where suffering from the fallouts in Kita Kanto, or northern part of eastern Japan. We tend to forget these areas because they are not the Fukushima area. However, in the early phase of fallout, the also cooperative headed by Mr. Oishi has focused on this issue. Now, Mr. Oishi, floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Oishi from Joso Cooperative. Psychological and the practical matters are incorporated in the Mr. Kawakami's activities, and compared to such a noble phase or noble activity, our activities are really mundane. Maybe you associate cooperative as a supermarket, but our organization is very small. That means that we have to cover everything from our pockets. However, we focus on the community-based activities, including mothers. So that is the characteristics of our cooperative JOSO. Now the area we cover from Fukushima Daiichi NPP, we are 200 kilometers away. 200 kilometers away from Fukushima Daiichi NPP, meaning that as a whole picture, all of the people across the globe believe that the Fukushima accident happens only within Fukushima Prefecture. However, even the area 200 kilometers away from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, plume and radioactive substances incurs the damages in our area. And now we try to achieve self-sufficiency by connecting producers and manufacturers. Therefore, more than 60% of fresh produces based on the community manufacturing, and therefore, if that soils and earth are contaminated by the radioactive substances, it's really a threat. When in 1997, when the fire happened, plume passed through the Tsukuba area. And now that means that we have experienced the fallout in 1999. And in addition to that, JCO had critically the accident and it made really panic. And now we are seeing the third accident caused by Fukushima Daiichi NPP on the 11th of March. Headquarters of cooperative Joso, including outlets, we incurred so many damages. For example, the walls went down and the desks are toppled down, chairs are toppled down, and everything was really messy in the office. And then the damages were so heavy that we couldn't do anything on March 11th. That means there is a failure of our reproduction. Although we had two-time experiences, but we had a failure in the reproduction. Therefore, I'd like to share these failure experiences. After sorting out our head office on the 12th of March, then there was an explosion happened. And then what happened upon the explosion on the 13th of March? Because this is a meltdown of the reactor core, therefore whole Kanto area, including the eastern Kanto area, may be damaged and collapsed. And therefore, on the 13th of March, we issued a distribution paper to our members, and then this is a fresh report about that meltdown. Back then, there are many producers living in Tohoku area, and therefore we tried to confirm the security of them, whether they still survived or some of them may be swept away by tsunami, and we couldn't know whether their situations, and we tried to confirm their status. And the most certain part of it that the village, together with manufacturers, there was the Ichinoku Green Bokujo, Yamakiwa Bokujo, a joint pastor in this area, and therefore we tried to went there, but we could not do that immediately after 3/11. And on the 2nd of April, we could be there, and we brought many bottled water. And then starting from 12th of March, we just tried to the survival status of the people in the affected areas. And then meltdown of core reactor happened, and because of that, what could happen because of the meltdown? We have to be really calm down to see the fact, and then we can take appropriate action. And in order to do that, we have to know what happened in Fukushima, and what will happen in Fukushima, and we issue those information in the flash reports. And then on the 13th of March, we tried to collect as much information as possible, and starting on the 14th March onward, we distributed these flash reports to our members. And then on the 16th of March, because the plume would pass through your area, therefore you should be within your house. You should not go out. And starting from 15th of March, the industries took action to let the employees evacuate from the areas. I believe the U.S. affiliated companies were the first to let employees evacuate from that area. Therefore, we issued the notification that the children should be far away from this area by sending them to the countryside. And if it's not possible, then we let the members know that they should be within the houses as much as possible. And for the employees, because of the EHS law, starting on the 11th of March, we tried to ensure the stable form of iodine. However, some employees had to go out for distribution and delivery of the items. And therefore, for those workers who had to go outside, we tried to ensure iodine. However, we couldn't. And therefore, we asked the warehouse of the seaweed in Funabashi City to bring iodine to us, or the seaweed to us, to suggest iodine. And we asked the delivery man to wear their mask. It looks like a Nazis and a toxic prevention mask. Therefore, some of the members were so stunned to see such a heavily protected delivery man. At any rate, on the 15th of March, since we have started collecting the monitoring data on the 12th of March by asking the collaboration of members, and we have put that measurement. and we found Fukushima was so damaged. Therefore, we could not get the measurement of monitoring posts in Fukushima, and therefore we had to use the monitoring posts in other areas, and we could not ask the members work forever. Therefore, we had to take turns to get the measurement, and as early as on the 15th of March, we issued the notification to let people know the plume. However, it's too late to people know it. And then on the third flash report, we could explain how plume passed through these areas. And we put together the data of the monitoring posts, including the aerial dose. And we let the aerial dose information to the members. And this is one of the information we issued. When we issued this second information, on the 20th of March, we put together all of the information and we issued the bulletin board on the 21st of March. And it's really ironic to see plume passing through on the 21st of March, meaning that now we are 1 day delayed for the actual passing through of the plume. It's not Otoka area, but on the early morning of 15th of March, Tsukuba residents knew that the plume would pass through over their areas, and because they have taken a look at the monitoring posting reading on the morning of 15th of March, and they know they had to stop children from going to school, and they have notified it to the education board of Tsukuba City. However, their alarm was ignored. Back then, there were still rolling blackout implemented, and therefore people had to go out to get the water from the ration area, ration post. Plume started from 4:30, and then at 7:20, all of the Mito City was covered by plume. But what you could see on the TV program is as late as 9:48. 9:48 means that all of the major plumes already passed through these areas. Therefore, in conclusion, as you can see here, virtually, this is the disaster caused by the NPP, and all of the roads were disrupted, and many damages incurred at the road. And therefore, together with the Red Cross organization, we tried to deliver the relief items in the first week after 3/11. However, because of the disruption of the transportation system, it's extremely difficult. Still, we tried, and in order to prepare for the plumes, we should have made an recommendation for people to running away, but we didn't. And many people were really easygoing, and we just let the members know that they should be within the houses. However, non-member citizens didn't feel any threat. And at our cooperative JOSO, at the 12th of March, the younger the person is, the faster they had to evacuate, and we determined the order of evacuation. And now we said that the people in their 50s should remain to distribute food and other necessities to residents. We have determined it in the committee held on the 12th of March. However, what's ironic is that the resident did not respond to our recommendations. They partly, the residents did not know the severity of the accident, and they did not know where their situation is. They must have known a certain degree of knowledge due to the Chernobyl. They should have known the impact of the plume. However, the problem is that we didn't have any drill or practice to take a refuge when plume attacks us. Therefore, we had to do whatever we could do as the second best approach. There are many members who nurse their children with their own milk. However, we must, therefore, we had to make a decision whether breastfeeding is good or not. And therefore, starting from the 21st of March, we started the examination of breast milk. 1 year after 3/11, we have already determined to liquidate or disassemble our organization on the 12th of 13th. However, not so many members did not budge. If the progress of the accident was different, maybe the situation would have been different. Anyway, we started our studies and surveys on 26th of March onward. Then please refer to the handout material where you can find what happened in the first 3 months. After 311, our testing started with breast milk, and you can see the materials, what kind of surveys and studies we conducted in the first 3 months after 311, and we detected iodine quite a lot. Iodine is represented by the yellow, starting from the breast milk, and then we moved on to the leafy vegetables such as spinaches, and then we moved on to the grasses of the pastures, and then soils and waters used for the field, and then we went back to breast milk, and after that we surveyed meats and eggs.
So that was our initial reaction. And after that, we did about 1,000 locations of surveys for the air dosage in the region. Where we found the high doses, we were actually able to go in, and then we had a 250-meter mesh. So our members went to select these areas. And of course, we talked to the local governments to ask them to take action. So this circle is 1 kilometer. And we wanted to expand this to the entire area. We worked with mothers, and we identified 950 kilometers from Kasumiura all the way to Tokyo Bay. So from southern Ibaraki to Tsukuba, and Moriya, which is our area, Abiko, Nagareyama, Kashiwa, and Matsuro. And then here, 1 square is 1 square kilometer, and we did 950 locations. So we tried to find locations that were flat where rain water would not have transferred any soil. So there were only some high elevation areas. We struggled to find some flat areas so that we could at least identify what the preliminary soil deposits were. And as we heard from day one from Professor Koide, most of the areas exceeded 40,000 becquerels, and we knew that this was not desirable. So judging from the soil deposition, this is dry content, so we actually looked at the moisture content as well because this is all dry weight. But on average, it exceeded 40,000 becquerels. And in some of the higher concentration areas, it was 960,000 or even 1.28 million becquerels per square meter. And this is what happened in areas as far as 200 kilometers away. So we'd been hearing about how even the external radiation alone would exceed 1 millisieverts. And from the residents' perspective, if you are measuring the soil, you could go back and forth and go back. So we were not able to understand what was happening in the initial phase. We wanted to do a preliminary irradiation level measurement. And then we also did a measurement from dust and debris. And in the dust in households being sucked in vacuums, the level was around 1,000 becquerels. The glass badge surveys didn't really work. And then in the autumn, we discovered that the initial radiation level was quite high. When the plume passed over, we were not able to take any protective measures, so the radiation exposure was higher than we had expected. We created a fund inside of the co-op to do blood testing and even urine testing in addition to the thyroid test. We also walked around the areas trying to figure out which areas were appropriate for children to play in. In trying to understand what the health effects were, we took the IPPNW German office literature. So there was an effort to translate this. The mothers started the work after Christmas, and then they spent about 6 days to translate this. I think that this is a photo taken of Sebastian in, I think, 2012 or 2013 in Matsumoto. And then starting in October of 13, we decided to do screening. And I think, according to Professor Tsuda, we should do it around 4 years based on Chernobyl experience, because we need to be prepared on our own. Even if we called on the government to do something, they were likely not to act. So we decided to be ready to do research and prepare. We worked with a local group, and the results of that screening. Here we're covering our emergency response. So this part covers what I was asked by Iwata-san to speak about in terms of emergency response, but most of what we did in the initial phase was not very effective, so we were only able to take remedial measures after the fact. I would say that we had not been able to do enough drills. From a practical point of view, of course, mothers were insistent that everything had to be tested. They wanted us to look into this, look into that. They were quite angry with us, so we would say, okay, we understand, and we would be testing various things. So this was all practical work that had to happen, and I'm sorry that it's not more noble stuff that we're talking about. But the next point, we had done testing of mother's breast milk. We wanted to understand if it was possible to estimate the initial inhalation radiation. So the very top part of this chart here is breast milk. We did about 2 tests with several people. The first one was March 24th, or maybe it started around 22nd, and then on the 24th we took a sample and the test was run on the 27th. And when we did the test, we found 31.8 becquerels. So if you surmise what it was when the breast milk was secreted, then it was 41 becquerels. 40,000 becquerels, excuse me. 410,000. And in autumn of 2011, we felt that perhaps this was not necessarily all concentrated in the breast milk. The co-op's view, these are all co-op members, so we know what they consumed, what their diet was. So contaminated food from a producer shipped on March 16th. This was spinach, and we ended up delivering this contaminated spinach, which had about 3,400, on just one day. So this was probably on March 17th, and then when we inspected, after that we stopped the shipment. Yeah, so we stopped the shipment on March 17th, but prior to that there was spinach that was delivered, and when we did some estimating later, it could have had 3,400 becquerels. In some high areas it could have been around 9,000, but in any case, and this is iodine, there was about 3,000 becquerels of that, but it was per kilo. So that's one batch of spinach is around 300 grams, so dad and mom will probably eat about 50 grams, and then the rest is left over for children. So even if they had consumed a lot of spinach, then it would have been only around 150 becquerels of the iodine. And the transfer to breast milk is estimated to be around 20%. So around 20% enters the breast milk, and about 25% would be excreted with the excretion speed that we assumed. So this is the inhalation dose from the National Environment Research Center. And this is a dust sample for the iodine in the air. We also ran the test for cesium, and here's the test results. So if you inhale this, then according to the data, you can find out how many grams you inhaled. You can see here that Moriya had the same kind of air condition as Tsukuba. It's about 30 kilometers away. On March 15th, then it was around 730 becquerels of iodine due to inhalation. On March 20th or 21st, it was around 1,000 becquerels due to inhalation of iodine that was inhaled. So that was really the peak. So over these 2 days, there was an acute irradiation, and the mother's breast milk was taken on March 22nd. On the second day, which was March 21st, the air iodine was around 0.22, so already quite low. So they were inhaling 0.22, and then tap water had about 7 becquerels. So the sum of that is around 12 becquerels. And if you eat 12 becquerels and your breast milk shows 12 becquerels, well, that seemed wrong to us. That seemed incongruous, so we looked at something similar. If it's about 20%, then it should be around 2.4 becquerels, but here it was 12 becquerels, and the other moms as well. Data showed similarity. This is a mother from Kashiwa City on March 31st. The air density. So if the air quality was the same as Chiba, then on March 31st, it would have been 2 becquerels of iodine in the atmosphere. This mother was rather sensitive, and she was using bottled water even in her kitchen for everything. So there was probably very little oral indigestion of water. So she wouldn't have even had the 33 or 14 from before. On March 30th, her breast milk showed 55.9 becquerels. The inhalation would have only amounted to around 44 or 45 becquerels of inhalation of iodine. And if you assume that about 20% of that would be present in the breast milk, then it would only be about 8 or 9 becquerels. But she was showing 55. And then in April, the air density was down to 0.06 becquerels per cubic meter. So that was 0.06 around 1 cubic meter. That's maybe 1 becquerel of iodine being inhaled. And from the breast milk, it would only be about 0.3 present. But instead, it was still around 16 becquerels in her breast milk. So we were wondering why, and we felt that the transfer rate to the breast milk, the thing is, there was more showing up in the breast milk compared to what she had inhaled. We worried that maybe the research institute's air sampler was not functioning properly. So we debated that, but apparently the National Research Center and even the JAEA, their monitors were working properly. We looked at additional exposure routes, but the spinach, even if you had 1 kilogram of spinach, then it could be tens of thousands of becquerels, but you can't even consume that much spinach. So that meant that over a very long period of time until the end of April, there was a lot of iodine that we believe was suspended in the air. So having come to that, there may have been more airborne iodine. So our co-op started the breast milk test on March 20 something, and we did a press conference to call on mothers and children to be evacuated from Fukushima. We did this news conference in April, and then the day after that, the Chief Cabinet Secretary Edano said that he would direct the Health Ministry to evacuate children and mothers. But the National Radiation Research Institute, NIRS, here's the data from Iwaki City. From Iwaki to Chiba, even on April 25th, there was still some present. The health ministry must have thought that there wouldn't be any present because the half-life is 8 days, but there was none present in Fukushima to Koriyama, whereas from Ibaraki south, so all the way south from Fukushima to Chiba, there was presence in the mother's breast milk. And the Japanese Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have issued some data. Dr. Akashi from NIRS gave a report out for the Ministry of the Environment. And if you use the transfer model from the ICRP publication 95, then they're saying that it would be about 1/millionth of 8. So in one day, it would be reduced to about 1/10, 90%, and then after 40 days, it's 1/millionth, 8th of a millionth, according to the ICRP model, 1/8 of a millionth. And if you inhale 1 becquerel, and they were only looking at ingestion. They were dismissing inhalation because that would have made the number higher. If you use the ICRP model, then the becquerels would have been between 330 to 1,190 millisieverts, and this came up in the experts panel. They decided that this was not desirable, so they were forced to look at an alternative scenario, and they decided that this second scenario was the best scenario to go with. I couldn't understand that this is the kind of thing that what scientists would do, because if they thought that the results did not sit well with them, they decided to not use the ICRP and decided to go with scenario 2, where they decided to put the cause on ingestion. From my point of view, this felt so wrong. Instead of doing something based on the facts, they decided to go with what seemed to be the most reasonable. So Dr. Akashi was responsible for this, is actually an author for a WHO report. And I have a feeling that these numbers were not even being shared with UNSCARE. So the initial evaluation, the evaluation of the initial irradiation is something that should be redone with new data collected, and that is our proposal. I know that Japan is considered to be a developed country, but I think that it blatantly ignores human rights. It's all about money, it's all about the economy. And I think that we are responsible for having created this kind of country. I think that we have a low level of civility, and we are responsible for this. We had a great ranch in Fukushima. We worked together with co-op consumers in developing this dairy farm, but we had to slaughter all of the cattle in June. We wanted to. Many children have grown up drinking the milk from this ranch, and it was a very sad moment for us when we had to stop this. I'm sorry for going over, but I know that there are many different biased views out there, and I hope that we can expect good work from scientists. Thank you very much.
Mr. Oishi, thank you very much. Very early on, he has been accumulating his own data. Government experts has been submitting different data from what he has been submitting. So we are seeing different reality, and also in terms of emergency response and how it should be. That's an issue that we really need to think about seriously now. There is the effort to resume the nuclear power generation, and at the Sendai power plant, this is Sendai in the south of Japan, in Kyushu, in Kagoshima. Well, they will be resuming the activity there as soon. But how will they deal with in case of emergency and accident? It's quite suspicious, and it seems that there are basically no ideas of countermeasures in place. But despite that, they are going to restart it. And furthermore, Japanese government is thinking about exporting nuclear technologies and nuclear power. The fact that the Japanese government is incapable of taking proper measures in case of accident seems to contradict with the fact that they want to export such technology. Furthermore, the Japanese government is not being accountable vis-a-vis the international community, not submitting the information that they should be. Next March in Japan, in in Tohoku area, where we will have the United Nations Disaster Prevention Conference. Mr. Kawakami, the first speaker, talked from the perspective of the supporters who are undertaking various activities locally, how to deal with various complex and complicated issues, including radiation. And Mr. Oishi, the second speaker, talked, as I said, mainly about the emergency responses, and what they did initially mainly had to do with the radiation measurement. Very important issues indeed. Now, we will have about 40 minutes left of this first session, and we would like to debate in a roundtable format. And there are much link and connection with the discussions that we had yesterday. So therefore, regarding the emergency countermeasures and radiation protection, I'd like to remember what has been said yesterday as we continue our discussion. There are also leftover questions that were not answered yesterday, so I'd like to cover those as well. Now, first of all, regarding the two presentations that we have heard, I would like to call upon the other roundtable members to make their comments or ask questions. Who would like to start? Professor Leverstock.
I would just like to make a point about the magnitude of the problem of responding to these kind of accidents. After the Chernobyl accident, the international organizations got together and said that this is generally something that goes beyond, even without an earthquake and a tsunami, goes beyond the capabilities of an individual country to deal with. So what was set up were two legally binding conventions, the early notification and the assistance convention. Under those conventions, it was the obligation of the Japanese government to let the IAEA know that an accident was likely. I mean, it should be a notification at the earliest point that you believe that there might be an accident. It was then the responsibility of the IAEA to help to assess what assistance would be required. The IAEA did not do that job. I looked, as soon as I heard from the press that there was had been an accident or potential for an accident, I looked on the IAEA's website. There was nothing. There was nothing nothing useful until the 14th in European time. And this was the same applied to the WHO. So there was a complete failure of the international system, because those days that, between the 11th and the 14th, they're extremely important to be prepared and to make the measurements that are necessary. Now, there's a lot of measurements here, but these cannot be put in. They cannot be looked at on their own. They have to go into a system, and the system has to be pre-existing, ready to accept the information. And when sufficient information is in there, you can start to talk about what procedures you need to take. Iodine should have been distributed very early on. But as I understand it, that might have been necessary at distances of up to 200 kilometers. That would not be within the normal planning for an accident. So the citizens' organizations can do a certain amount to deal with these situations. But what is needed is a pre-existing system, and that's what the international organizations were supposed to have. That they didn't have it, or it wasn't working, is really an extremely serious criticism. And that the UNSCEAR have collaborated in trying to cover that up, which means that they wrote a report which was intended to mislead and misinform. So it's not just Japan there's a problem here. The problem is with the international organizations as well. And that has to be addressed, because without that, I don't think that a viable response can be made to accidents of this magnitude. And that was the lesson from Chernobyl. And that was nearly 30 years ago. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
はい、ありがとうございました。ベバストクさんは今の述べられたことを、論文として科学という、岩波書店から出ている科学雑誌ございますが、そこにも、発表されておりますし、市民科学者国際会議のホームページ。
And that journal is you can find this on the website of CSRP in the Japanese and English versions. He has also held 3 days ago an interview and press conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club in Tokyo, so you can get that information as well. And I am hoping that there will be some kind of response to this from the Japanese government or from other international organizations. Any comments or questions? Thank you very much. My name again is Kawakami. Having heard this discussion, what I felt is the following. The notion of citizens, I think it has its limit, and I feel that very strongly. First of all, citizens come from the word kibitas, which is mean people around police or city or from ancient Greek. And so citizens actually have to do with the interest of the people, the residents of police or city. So therefore, there are various interests among various stakeholders. And so therefore, it is very good and ideal to decide through a debate among various citizens or stakeholders. But that said, when in a case where there is a conflict of interest among different citizens, then we need some kind of structure that goes beyond that conflict of interest. I think that's seems to be what is happening. Can we find a solution in a religion? Well, maybe it's not so easy, but however, what we need perhaps is a coalition of citizens and others who would try to solve this from a much higher level. Thank you very much. Ms. Tanioka? One point regarding what Keith said was very important. System need to be preset so that it can function. A program needs to be within that operating system so that something would happen when you press the button when you need it. I think that's what he really meant as well. And before March 11th, when we look at the situation before March 11th, the law, legal system, manuals, and other programs did not exist. And also, there has been nothing within the government regarding these matters as well. So in that sense, the ministers did not know what to do in case of such and such situations. These kind of questions were ubiquitous at the time post March 11th within the Japanese government. And I felt that, and I heard that kind of questions all the time right after March 11th. Regarding Speedy, around 15th or 16th of March, someone said, oh, but didn't we have something as Speedy? Was what I heard. And that was the first time that people started talking about what is Speedy. Now, of course, nothing can be done about the past. We cannot go back in history. But when we are resuming the nuclear power generation, could we really restart power plant without emergency plan? Within 30-kilometer radius, that's a very important area. So there has to be an emergency planning. But they don't have a proper planning, but they will resume the power generation. This is what needs to be preset and pre-decided before we start. Earthquake will occur, accidents will occur. If there's earthquakes, maybe roads will be disrupted and destroyed. We have to find a bypass so that people can evacuate. And if there are issues and accidents within several power plants, then we need to have a proper plan so that the self-defense force can be deployed as well. We need to have several paths and alternative paths for the SDF can be so that SDF can be deployed. Without such a plan, we are trying to restore it. I have been talking with NCR in the US many times, and we always say that there is no restart of power plant unless there is an emergency planning. But yet, the Japanese government is trying to ignore this warning. And without such proper evacuation or plans, they are trying to press the go button, the green light. And if something actually happens, they will repeat the exact same mistake. That is the structure that we are seeing, and we need to prevent this no matter what. What I'm fearing is that on top of this issue, there is another compound issue of the Secret Information Protection Act. What information can be revealed and or not, that can be selected easily. Of course, the information provision has been insufficient until now, but furthermore, we will have even less information in the future once the act becomes enacted in reality. Thank you very much. Having heard Keith and Tanioka-san's comments, I agree with them. And of course, the system needs to be preset as much as possible. However, system that can be in place beforehand and the system that we really need once the accident happens might be different. In a way, we need to create a ship and we need to fix the ship as we go on after the accident. And the human disaster, there's basically no margin for human disaster either. And that's also another reality. Of course, systems need to be designed and in place. That's indispensable element. But beyond that, maybe I shouldn't comment about this, but however, I kind of feel like it's impossible to have a system like that beforehand. No matter how much preparation there will be areas where we will not be prepared beforehand. And therefore, what is important is to think about what to put in place a margin so that we can deal with the issues post accident. And unless we think about this margin, we will actually have a further increasing power of technocracy. So I think that's a question that I think we need to raise beforehand. So that's my comment.
About Fukushima, and according to yesterday's Mr. Shishido's remark, under the emergency situation, how Fukushima local governments acted. Therefore, I'd like to ask Mr. Shishido to share the situation or actions by the local government in Fukushima. Thank you very much. First of all, monitoring or detection of the threat and the dissemination of that threat were not prepared well because the setup for them was totally wrong. It's all right if we detect the radiation at the monitoring post at the threshold line. However, the reading was taken in the very remote area, and those who noticed the importance of that, they could take actions. And after Chernobyl, some people are aware of the importance of taking action on their own. And for example, Mihara town has prepared iodine agent on their own, thanks to the voluntary action by citizens. That's why the Mihara town villagers can take iodine. So as these examples represent, systems should be prepared. However, another important point is the operation. If the system is in place, if there is no operation procedure, it does not work. For example, after the explosion on the 12th of March, there are many passenger cars for people to evacuate. However, the SDF and the police cars ran away by doing nothing. As a law enforcement, they had to stop residents to let the situation know. For example, the human aspect, they have to let people know that it's impossible. And then, because there's nothing taken by the local governments, therefore residents had to take voluntary actions. For example, they have purchased a dosimeter. However, just on the upper limitation is 20 millisievert, so it's not meaningful. And then there is a dosimeter, which is a really stupid name. However, it's good to have something for measurement. However, because I and the science teacher happened to know them, that's why we had to purchase those dosimeters. However, there are many people who didn't know that dosimeters are available, and there are even the science teachers who didn't know the importance of taking a measurement. Therefore, systems and operations and drill, we have to have a discussion, a program where all of the stakeholders get together. If you have only system, it doesn't work, and if you have only procedural matters such as operation, it doesn't work. You have to have a system, operation, and people. Yes, Mr. Ueda, please. Emergency action ensuing NPP accident, it should not stop, or it cannot stop at the prefecture boundary, meaning that the government of Japan has to take an action. That's why JCA has set the chain of commands under certain scenarios. However, so-called off-site center did not function because of the tsunami and earthquake. Because of that, chain of command was disrupted, and then
the disaster described by Mr. Tanioka happened. However, the actual situation was going beyond that. Sorry, I had to correct your remark. I will do that later on, including REFS. The experts, after taking this accident, many people, including NIRS experts, believed that they had to take the measurements, and actually some professors in the universities have taken the reading. However, the problem is that those readings and measurement values were not shared. In addition to that, Professor Kosaka of Tokyo University, he served as the counselor to the cabinet office, and he has made many recommendations. However, apart from that, there are many voluntary citizens' actions, as you heard in Mr. Oishi's presentation today. But it's really shocking that there are the chain of commands in place. However, it should be led by the government of Japan. It's not the responsibility of the citizens, however, because the government of Japan did not do anything. That's why Oishi-san and his members stood up to action to prepare the good command chain of command. For example, as the counselor, there was a record of a remark by Professor Kosaka, and we saw the hidden agenda of the government of Japan. And however, we don't know why there was no specific action taken. There was a scenarios prepared to prepare for the potential disasters, and there were experts making recommendations, and the government can use those advices. Still, this disaster happened, and that is the biggest problem. Therefore, we have to identify why this disaster could happen. As Mr. Oishi mentioned, we have to reanalyze available data to re-estimate the initial damage. And this is a really important obligation that all of the experts have to do. However, the problem is that they don't have a sense of ownership. Therefore, in that sense, presentation made by Mr. Oishi today shows a really significant point. Ms. Tanioka, do you have a say to Mr. Ueda's remark? Yes, there are several points I have to share. First of all, monitoring. There are groups of monitoring. Yes, there was a problem of offset measurements. However, there was no plan for the Ministry of Education. And then there are about 20 experts dispatched from the NIRS as well as the other research institutions. And this is the first time to get monitoring. I mentioned the headcount importance and its indication for the national officers. And if there is a headcount, there is a budget. And if you see the budget and headcount, that means that the government of Japan is in the situation where they can take tangible actions. Therefore, we have to always pay attention to the headcounts and the budget for a certain action. I have to emphasize that there's no budget and the headcount for the monitoring. I asked for explanation, but I couldn't get a good justification. The second point is the sorting out the necessary government tasks. There are several monitoring facilities available. However, their operations were suspended because operation fees cost about several millions of Japanese yen. And then some parliament members said that we had to save government money. That's why the budget was not available for those monitoring posts located in the northern part of Kanto. That's why it's not operational. Therefore, what the government of Japan says saving is really different from what they should say, because they must have paid the money for the monitoring post. However, they didn't, and they used our money, taxpayers' money, in a wrong way. Therefore, we have to re-establish a good system to prevent it, but it must be very difficult. Stock and Sebastian, I saw your hands shooting up, but can you please wait for Dr. Ueda, because these two distinguished guests have a say. Can I go first? Yes. When the accident happened, many people focusing on the initial action. Immediately after the accident, however, the toxic hazardous materials is released after the accident, and people is exposed to such hazardous materials, and that's why negative impact on the health happens. And we have to study the negative impact on the health, and otherwise we don't know what happens to the people, and the symptoms happen among people is caused by the accident or not. We cannot identify that. That means that we have to study after the accident, and currently post-3/11 survey is going on in Fukushima. However, screening rate goes down. On the other hand, thyroid cancer below 18 years old alone remains as the screening. Then there is the law food sanitation law, and upon the request of a doctor, the subject food should be surveyed, and this is a shall clause. Therefore, including environmental study and the health study must be conducted because there is a shall clause and the food sanitation law, and the report must be submitted. Therefore, if you have a law in place, everything will go on automatically. In addition to that, under the food sanitation law, there is a shall clause of studies and surveys, and because of that, there is an enactment rule, there is an enactment regulations for food sanitation law, statistics preparation rule for food sanitation rule. There are many detailed the regulations and rules under the umbrella law of food sanitation, and because of that, there are many reports made. In addition to that, the template of a paper report is defined well, and the related regulations of the food sanitation law. That's why there are many scandals of food. Still, you see a very small number of litigations. If you see the lawsuit related to the food, that is the violation of a food sanitation law, that is the Minamata mercury disease. And usual scandal because these two cases violated the food sanitation law. That's why there are tons of lawsuits. However, EHS law and food sanitation, other as well as other occupational related laws, they don't have shall clauses, and that's why there's no enactment regulations underneath those umbrella laws. As to the nuclear power generation, there are, for example, compensation law. However, there's no shall clauses. That's why although law exists, but it's meaningless. For example, if you look at the infectious diseases, yes, there is the infectious disease law. However, it does not stipulate that the study must be conducted. Therefore, if trouble happens, they have to rely on the food sanitation law, and then the officials can initiate the studies and surveys. That's why the scandals caused by medications and air pollution accidents, as well as the EHS-related occupation accidents, you see the tons of lawsuits. In addition to that, burden of proof is on the complaints. They are really damaged by the disaster and health impact. However, because proof of burden is on the shoulders of the complaints, therefore they have to stand up to make the case at the court, and they have to prove what the evidence. And Okayama University is really lenient not to do anything, and they are so amenable to the government of Japan, and the Japanese Bar Association has appealed the importance of the enactment of the viable laws. However, it has not happened, and the responsibility of Minamata mercury disease should have been clarified at the court. However, for long years, there has no such move, and finally, there's a lawsuit lodged. Still, there is no ruling made. And another problem is that the indifference of parliament members. The parliament members do not care the fact that there is no effective laws existed, and because of that, for example, the members of the Democratic Party of Japan passed the special law for the Minamata mercury disaster, I described the details in the papers, but they didn't take a look at that. There's nothing done by parliament members. However, if they the diet members do not read laws and they don't have any will to pass the necessary laws, and that's why the policies without the support of applicable laws were implemented one after another. They just issued the government orders and instructions. And that means what the government of Japan is doing is exactly the same as not just Germany has done. Therefore, the Diet members have to be really serious to think about the legal framework, including the enactment of the related laws.
あんまり、何か良い提案っていうものは持ってないんですけ
I
ど、
don't have good suggestions and proposals in a specific manner.
もう原子力発電所っていうものができてから50年以上経ってます。
More than 50 years have passed after the initiation of the nuclear power generation.
WHO や IAEA やアンスケアなどいろんな国際的な組織
Then there are many international national organizations such as the IAEA and ISCAR.
チェルノブイリ
It's true, post-Chernobyl situation have seen some actions by those international organizations. Still, if you look at the real world, nothing has changed even after Chernobyl accident. And again, because of that, Fukushima accident happened.
schlecht abgelaufen wie Tschernobyl. でチェルノブイリから学んだことが
Learning and lessons from Chernobyl must have existed. However, it looks as though there were nothing we have learned from the Chernobyl accident.
Verständnis gegeben von den beiden zuständigen Behörden für diese Fragen vom Bundesamt für Strahlenschutz und von der Strahlenschutzkommission. ただ福島の後ドイツでは
Then after Fukushima,
組織が
related government agencies started
Sie haben offen
to give a thought
Deutschland
about the issues
in der Lage
in Germany,
einen solchen Unfall zu managen. ドイツ政府ももし
including federal government of Germany,
ドイツは対応できないだろう
said that Germany could not take effective action if the similar accident at Fukushima happened.
その難しい問題に
For 2 years, they have thought the very difficult issues.
ただその考えている、そういう問題についてドイツ政府も考えてはいるんだけ
So
れど
there is a
考
deliberation
える
by the government of Germany. However, the problem is that
議論を
their ideas are not disclosed to the public.
für nukleare Katastrophen
They have only the behind-the-scene deliberations and considerations.
起こった時の
Right now,
対応について
as to the actions after the potential nuclear power plant accident,
grundsätzlichen Probleme
situation is a bit better than before.
でも
Still,
ドイツだって
even in Germany, if the accident happens,
問題っていうことについてはまだ全然解決
there's no solution at all
誰がそ
for
れらの
the
被害について
fundamental problems and who pay the cost if damage happens. There's no answer to this very important question.
man die Struktur von ANSCAR und die Struktur von IAEA und WHO so verändern könnte, dass sie dann tatsächlich einen Unfall wirklich managen können. だからみんなで
And therefore,
IAEA とか ANSCAR とか WHO のような国際組織がこのような
there are many international organizations, including the IAEA, the UNSCAR, and the WHO, can get together to think about the actions they can take if this kind of accident happens. Yes, it's possible for them to do that.
でも実際にそれらの国際組織にの一員となっている人たちを見るとどういう
But if you look at the members belong to these international organizations,
そんなことに全く興味を持ってない
you realize that they don't have an interest on such an issue at all.
nach praktikablen kleinen Schritten suchen, wie man die Situation verbessern kann. 確かに彼らは今福島の後
It's true
どうにかして
that
少しずつ
the
小さな一歩ずつ
they try to make a small improvement step by step to be able to take effective actions after the accident. we see such an improvement after Fukushima.
Die kurze Schlussfolgerung für mich wäre, wenn nach 50 Jahren Betrieb von Kernkraftwerken keine Lösung da ist, wie man mit Unfällen umgeht, wenn der gesamte Schaden auf der Bevölkerung liegt, sowohl das Ertragen der Erkrankungen und der Todesfälle als auch die finanzielle Last, dann muss man die Finger davon lassen.
In my perspective, 50 years have passed since the inception of nuclear power generation. Still, when an accident happens, ordinary general public is the one to incur the negative impacts, including diseases and so on, and they have to pay for the cost. If that the situation remains even right now, we should not use nuclear as the energy source, and it's high time for everyone to think about it.
Die halte ich für unrealistisch. Und das ist folgende, dass man die Spielregeln für Kernkraftwerke so macht, dass sie in der Lage sein müssen, eine Katastrophe vollständig organisatorisch und finanziell zu bewältigen. Die Kernkraftwerke, nicht die Regierung und nicht die Bevölkerung.
I understand this is totally unrealistic. Still, I have to say this. That is, when that accident happens at a nuclear power plant, the utility company has to assume the responsibility and they have to pay all the costs for the affected citizens. Otherwise, the operator should not operate the nuclear power plant, and I believe it should be enacted as a law or act. Once such law or act is enacted, then people realize that the electricity generated by the nuclear power plant is too expensive to sustain. Therefore, just one law can eliminate all of the nuclear power generation plants. If you look at the usual companies and the plants and the factories, you know that they prepare for the potential accident, and if accident happens, they do have a rule to pay the compensations for the affected people. However, nuclear power plant is immune to such system. If you look at the countries, you find that the treatment and handling of the operators of nuclear power plant is totally different from the ones for the usual industries. For example, if the car company causes an accident, that car company is forced to pay compensation. However, such a thing does not happen, and it's the same for all of the countries.
So I see that Keith has his hand up, Iwata-san too. Actually, Kawakami-san has left, so we can no longer engage with him, but can we ask Oi-san for his thoughts on the current conversation? And then I'd also like to hear from the mothers who are with us from Fukushima. We are running behind. But Keith?
Yeah, I should just clarify. When I said a system, I didn't mean something just on paper. I meant that there should be a framework within which quite a large number of experts on the country level, in which a large number of experts are working together on an agreed plan to operate as soon as the accident is reported. That involves communications outwards and inwards from the company, from the civil authorities, from the meteorological office. All this information should go in to evaluating what the likely consequences are going to be if a release occurs. So this should operate before the release occurs, and it should predict what are likely to be the areas to be subject to fallout, what the levels are likely to be, and then there should be monitoring, fixed monitoring and mobile monitoring, that can go and check on these values. Only in that sort of way can an accident be properly responded to. And I would just say to Sebastian that, in fact, the United Nations organizations did set up such a system. For example, Finland was a part of that. They have a dedicated office in Helsinki. They have 40 experts to draw upon. They can operate 24 hours a day for as many days as is necessary. And they have expertise across the board, from nuclear engineering to effects of ionizing radiation. They have direct connections to the Finnish Meteorological Office. They have direct communication with all the reactors in Finland and with many in Russia where they might pose a threat to Finnish territory. So these systems have been set up, and the real fact, as I've said so many times before, in the case of the Fukushima accident, the international component failed. And in that extent, they failed Japan. But I'm not in a position to comment on what faults there were on the Japanese side, but I can see very, very clearly that the IAEA, which took the lead in this international response system, failed to operate. And that is one of the reasons why we have the problems that we have today.
はい、岩田さんどうぞ。
岩田さん? From June of 2011, I was living in Fukushima City for about 2 years. And what was very much a mystery to me is, and I did a lot of investigation myself, but I wanted to understand what was happening in an emergency situation. Unit 4 now has a lot of its fuel has been removed, so it was very unstable. And then I wanted to understand what they were prepared to do in the event of another emergency. So I talked to the cabinet, Fukushima prefecture, and even the education ministry. And from what I understand, they told me that the local government was responsible for drawing up a plan to respond to what would be considered a regular disaster. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has developed guidelines. The Nuclear Regulatory Authority has developed guidelines, and I wanted to see if there was something available for me to see, but I only saw one set for Iwaki. I wanted to understand if the guidelines were really going to function. In order for those guidelines to truly have effect, at that time, I talked to Yodogawa-san, who was the head of the Futaba Meteorological Office, and he said that at that time there were more things that they should have done, because I asked if there were more things that they had done, and he told me that he thought they should have communicated more with the local residents because, for example, only 10% of the office staff, there was only about 10% of the office staff vis-a-vis the population, and they physically cannot distribute the iodine pills to everyone. So there's no sense in simply criticizing that, as Kageura-san said. The TEPCO nuclear power plants have already been destroyed. So rather than thinking about an emergency as in theory, we need to think about this in real terms. And Kawakami-san has already left, but there was something that I wanted to ask Kawakami-san, because as far as I know personally, in the church community, there have been conversations about how to stock up on iodine tablets. We heard earlier from Oishi-san that the Josho co-op considers its initial reaction to have been a failure. However, in essence, that's something that should have been done by the central government. And from my point of view, I think that your group did everything that the national government should have done to test the breast milk and to test for air dosage and even cut down on food consumption. In the future, the ramifications could be very widespread. Of course, something needs to be done at the government level. However, we also need to understand what should be done as families, as communities. All of those things need to be predetermined. I think that we need to be prepared. We have an audience who is here with us outside of the round table. I'm sure that there are some people who would like to share their comments. But today we have another session, sessions 2 and 3. So we will try to secure time for other members of the audience to speak up. I don't think we will have enough time in this morning session. And we just had a question posed to Oishi-san. I've received one question, so I'll ask Ueda-san to explain the question. This came through Twitter. Oi-san, you shared a lot of different measurements. You said that the glass badge was a failure. Can you explain to us a little bit more? And if you could also share some overall thoughts as well. Regarding the glass badge, we worked with Chiyoda Technol, but they did not provide us with the raw data. So they subtracted the background radiation values. And the actual dosimeter readings and the glass badge values, we tried to see if they would match. So we had people carrying around regular dosimeters, and that would count also the background radiation as well. So we tried to work with that, but Chiyoda Technol did not provide us with the raw data. So power plant workers and medical workers used to wear the glass dosimeter, so it's kind of old-fashioned, or it isn't necessarily very accurate. I think that they've developed something more advanced that children in Fukushima wear. I've heard that they're a little bit more better in terms of performance, but your body, the human body, ends up acting as a physical shield to some extent, so it's really not that accurate. So that was one problem. We did it for 1 month, it wasn't working. We did it for 3 months too. Of course, the producers in Fukushima were seeing the numbers, like 1.6 in Nihon Matsu on an annual basis. It was maybe 1.6 millisieverts. So they were saying that these numbers were being provided. And we saw a few of the numbers present for Abiko, but we think that the current glass dosimeters were not working. As Dr. Baverstock was saying, the global system is designed to make a profit from nuclear power, and we live against that backdrop. So in order to keep that going, countries or governments want to keep their citizens complacent, or at least to refrain from complaining. And I think that's the other side of the picture. And I think that the UN is snuggling up to that side. They are giving direction that supports that movement. So what part do we try to tackle and break apart? So Dr. Baverstock said that UNSCARE should be dismantled. If they fall so short of basic requirements, then it is completely unfair. So I think that could be a tactic for us. But what we need to think about very carefully is certainly for the nuclear power plants, but there are things, it's mutually exclusive from human lives, from natural, and nuclear power is that. If there is some kind of a facility that forces us to have to evacuate, then the presence of those plants themselves should be revisited. Our whole nation has to think about restarting those nuclear power plants, to be using authority or money to rebuild that establishment. What kind of rights can citizens speak of? I think it's about how do we ensure that we are able to secure our human rights. Yes, we can talk about protection, how we failed, what worked. And it's like, well, what else can you do? Because we already had a nuclear power plant in the neighborhood and there was a base, so we had to be prepared to react. That doesn't mean that we are condoning the presence of these facilities. So, in the aftermath of the accident, it's almost like the residents are up in arms against each other. But we need to figure out what we can do. Structurally, the socially weak are left behind because it's almost like there's a worldwide nuclear power village, and that is where all of the power is consolidated. And we have to deal with the divide. In the local community, we need to have self-autonomy. If we will fight against this fully if there is any contaminated food forced upon us, but what would we do if our own local communities were completely destroyed? We have to share our knowledge. The system is trying to divide the country by creating power plants in different areas and then showing us money to keep us docile. But now I think we are being tested in terms of what the local communities can do. The same can be said for our community and for Fukushima. But when I try to talk about this, people think about me like, oh my gosh, why is he still talking about radiation? Even moms can get into arguments over this.
Perhaps we need to experience this multiple times, but including the rest of the world, we need to think about and reclaim our own life and rights. And we in Japan actually need to remake and organize so that we can reclaim our lives and rights. People have already this experience. And so I think this should be an opportunity to rebuild the society no matter how long it takes. We need to reorganize citizens, and we need to reclaim the rights for self-determination, to ensure the right of people to make their own decision or regain this right. This is the kind of movement that we'd like to start. There was an applause for this comment. Keith said that the current N square needs to be dismantled and set up a new system within perhaps the United Nations or that can protect the people. That's what he suggested. This kind of reform at the international level. And there's also regional efforts that Oishi-san has been undertaking in order to really empower the local people. Also, unfortunately, Kawakami-san has left this roundtable, but some of the issues that he mentioned was that there's a movement to reduce the amount of the thyroid screening within the government currently, and how can we tackle this issue was something that he also talked about.
And this is also an issue at the parliament, the Japanese Diet's level, and that's something that the parliamentarians need to work on. It's also at the level of the prefectures as well. But it's something that also the citizens movement can tackle as well. So at various levels, I believe, there are issues that need to be dealt with. We are kind of focusing on the emergency response within this session, but there are still some measures that need to be taken now as we speak for radiation protection, and that will be covered further in the afternoon session. But we have the participants from Happy Island, and I have Chiba-san, Sato-san. Perhaps I'd like to ask them for their comments, please. Yes. I am actually, I'd like to talk about the family level, the household level efforts. In terms of the radiation protection after the March 11th accident, these radiation protection is left for us as individual responsibility. And depending on what kind of information an individual obtained, the decision was made on whether to take measures or not. And there was considerable gap. In myself, I had the sense of crisis, so I was searching on the web and obtaining various information, and I came to the conclusion that we cannot be optimistic of the situation. That was my case. And as Shishido-san mentioned, the Fukushima prefectural government took measures so as not to see the population decrease. And Fukushima prefectural government used the keyword rumors, unfounded rumors, and that's how they claim the stance of no real harm. So they gave up their responsibility to protect their own citizens. People did not know what to do, what measures to take, and they are currently living under such condition. The information is definitely manipulated. The truth is hidden. So the people of Fukushima Prefecture, they don't know what kind of harm and they are perceiving because of the accident. Most of the Fukushima residents still do not know what kind of impact they perceived. That's why they cannot take protective measures. Only few people who have access to the information decide to protect their own children, and that is the current situation of Fukushima. There are various ways of protecting ourselves against radiation. But there is the Fukushima, the health management survey, but there's also other measurements and screening and testing that are provided by the citizens' organizations. But for most of the people who live in Fukushima, they don't even know the availability of these other options. In terms of recuperation, most of the citizens do not know that there are recuperation programs that they can utilize. So, in a way, the reality is that most citizens do not know what has happened. And that is why they are at a disadvantage in terms of information, and they are therefore forced to be irradiated. The parents may have farms, or they might be growing crops in the garden, and the children still eating the crops that they harvest. That's something that is ordinary in Fukushima, and they don't know what the impact of consuming such harvests are, and the general information available is that it's all safe. Even local TV programs is in that kind of state. Reporters still already after 2011 accident in the 2011, and reporters went around different parts of Fukushima to introduce very tasty produce from various regions in Fukushima. I had
actually never, and people thought that it's not possible that Japanese government would just irradiate their citizens. Most people, despite a March 11th accident, still believe in the government. As for the individual stance and decisions, and this goes for schools, board of eds, and also government as well, they are on the side of the information provided by the government. So what us mothers say, the mothers with the consciousness and awareness of risk say, are considered to be the comments made by people who are overreacting. That's why no one takes us seriously. So then we have to demonstrate the reality of the pollution and contamination. Then citizens, the mothers, need to stand up. Not only relying ourselves on the official monitoring post data, but we need to have more detailed monitoring. So these mothers are participating in the actual measurement of the soil and other environment that surround their own children. And they demonstrate and they gather this data and demonstrate that to the government. Well, that's what needs to be done so that the government finally take us seriously. That's the current situation. When it comes to the school program, the school food program, we have been working on this for a long time. In Fukushima, there is a subsidy to promote local consumption, local production, local consumption. And there is a tax money that is used to really promote and make children eat Fukushima produce. This movement has been accelerating. This was because the government has been manipulating the actual data and saying that it was safe to consume. But there's yet another problem. The locality, the local people need to take their own action, but yet they didn't do so, and it's truly a crazy state. I really think that this is really the extreme example of craziness, of the lack of measures taken. Nuclear power generation truly is an economic activity. So when it comes to what to do going forward, as long as economy is the most important element of reconstruction of Tohoku, people would perceive our activities as we are as prohibiting the effort to reconstruct. The local people are criticizing us, saying that we are walking unfounded rumors, and they all think that we are bringing negative impact to the locality. If each and every citizen participate in the economic activity, and there are so many people involved: farmers, fishers, tourism, restaurateurs, various service industry people. As long as everyone is involved in the nuclear power generation, and none of them can stand on the side of the criticism. And that is why our voice is so weak, asking to protect our own children. Our action is considered to be a very peculiar and activity undertaken by only certain people. And also, there is a certain pressure of women or children making comments to the government. Whenever we need to claim something to the government, there is a certain pressure from the relatives as well, saying that we are bringing shame to the entire family, that we are being used in politics. So within such pressure, it's extremely difficult for us to protect our own children. And I'm wondering when we will see a day when there will be a help. But no one actually helped us. That's why we stood up by ourselves. We stood up, but however, we were criticized. We were criticized by our own husbands and our relatives. This is the reality that I'd like to share with you. Thank you very much.
We covered international issues of international system. We also covered the reality of day-to-day life in the disaster-afflicted region. In a way, it really is an issue of how we live and how we are as human beings. We need to conclude this morning session, but the issues that were raised will continue to be discussed this afternoon. Mr. Oishi, thank you very much for sharing extremely valuable data. And I understood very well what you do on your day-to-day basis, and like to ask you to continue your efforts and activities. Also, I'd like to thank the high school representative and other young people who are participating in the symposium. I'd like to ask for your round of applause.